So how do you know if you have a problem with drugs and alcohol or even behaviors? There has to be a way of telling, right? We can't just say, well, no, I don't think so, until proven otherwise. So what is it? How do we know? Are there criteria for being an addict? Is there criteria? Of course there is. It's outlined in the DSM-4, the DSM-5. Now they call it substance use disorder, which I think is idiotic. But it is what it is. So what would constitute substance use disorder?
Feeling.
What is that?
The feelings.
No.
So when you say substance abuse disorder, you're saying that they're saying it's
There's a criteria. There's a list of symptoms. How do you know if you have a cold? Sneezing, aching, coughing, stuffy head, fever, not being able to rest. I took it from the commercial. Remember that old commercial? So those are symptoms. So if I see you and you're coughing and you're sneezing and you have watery eyes and you feel aches and pains and you're tired and so on, what can I assume from that? He's sick. He's sick. And then I say, well, how do you know that? Well, he's coughing. He's got a stuffy nose. He's got a fever. He can't read this and so on. So I would go down the criteria and say he meets this many criteria out of this. So of course he's got a cold. Okay. Same with addiction. Same with mental illness. All of them have symptoms. They have an etiology, which is a beginning. They have a progression, which is an epidemiology, and symptomology, which is the symptoms of them. And then they have a treatment, and then they have a prognosis. So what are the symptoms that could give us the telltale signs that someone has a problem with drugs and alcohol? What would be the first one? Talked about it a little earlier. Well, the first one is lack of control, being out of control. When that person drinks or uses or does the behavior, once they do it beyond a certain point, they can't control it. Did anybody purposely get a DUI here and say, you know what, I'm going to get a DUI. I can stop and I don't have to, but I want to.
Okay.
No, nobody does that. Nobody says, hey, you know what, I sure would like to break up with my significant other by getting in a big fight when I get home. Okay, so the reason they're doing those things is because they can't control their emotions. They can't control themselves in their thinking to the point of avoidance. So they engage in this lack of impulse control, and they indulge it, and then they act out, and that leads to terrible consequences. So people that don't have the mechanism for impulse control, when they drink beyond a certain point, are out of control. Usually, if I were to put this into practical application, there's people that I've seen, acquaintances and even friends of mine in the past, that they may go out with the intention of not getting drunk, obviously, and having a good time. Once they get to, let's say it's a guy friend of mine, about 6 foot, 185, 90 pounds. When they have about 2 or 3 drinks, they're fine. And you're like, oh, okay, normal, everything's good. Once that person gets to about 5 or 6 drinks, there seems to be a little switch that connects. And you could see the look on their face and the way their whole demeanor changes. And when that switch comes on, I'm like, time to plan an exit strategy, because he's off and running now. Conversation changes from qualitative to quantitative and superficial, and that guy's more interested in getting more drinks in him. And they start to act very differently. And the more they drink, the more obnoxious, the more difficult they become. Yeah, attitude changes dramatically, their demeanor changes, their perspective changes, they start to usually be argumentative or dismissive, or they become egocentric and they become self-centered. You know what I mean? they start to pull within, and you could see the turmoil and the frustration. You can almost feel it. And then that person, when they drink too much, what happens? Usually, not always, because there's happy drunks and sad drunks and mean drunks and all that other stuff, but the extreme changes in mood is what matters. Most of the time they become frustrated or very angry or over emotional. And and then they start to lose control of themselves. Then towards the end, if you're still sticking around and haven't been offended enough to leave, what happens is they start to lose the capacity to think rationally, and they do very dumb things, make very poor decisions, which usually separates them from their money, their freedom, their license, and their relationships. Not necessarily in that order, but close. Everybody understand?